A lot of news to start with this morning. There are growing concerns over a banking crisis after the fall of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank.
And it's not just here in the U.S. Depositors overseas are also worried about the security of their money after more banking troubles in Europe. The Swiss bank Credit Suisse announced yesterday it will borrow nearly $54 billion from the Swiss central bank to shore up liquidity, and it will seek to repurchase debt. The troubled bank is hoping those moves boost investor confidence. Still, the bank shares plummeted by as much as 30% yesterday after the news. U.S. markets followed suit. The Dow dropped 280 points, and the S&P 500 also closed lower.
All of this as Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen appears before the Senate Finance Committee this morning to discuss the president's fiscal year 2024 budget. Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver joins us now with analysis on the latest banking news. And we also have Washington's reaction with NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale. Good morning to both of you on what is a very chaotic, confusing day. Caleb, let's start with you. Tell us what is going on with Credit Suisse, and is there ties to what we saw happen with Silicon Valley Bank? What's your read on things?
All banks are under scrutiny right now, but Credit Suisse has its own issues. It delayed releasing its annual report because it found material issues, inaccuracies probably in 2021 and 2022. That set off some fire alarms. Shares started plunging earlier this week. Its biggest investor, the Saudi National Bank, could not invest more in the bank. It needed some capital. It couldn't because of regulatory restrictions, and there was concerns. Shares plunged 30% yesterday. They've rebounded. Why? Because Credit Suisse is taking that $54 billion loan from the Saudi National Bank, the Swiss National Bank, I should say, and that's going to stabilize it. So shares are back, and that contributed to a market recovery yesterday because, as you said, Dow was down 725 points. At the close, it was only down about 280 points. So there's a recovery there because of this, but this is one headline after the other that says there is trouble in the banking sector, and now it's spread overseas.
All right, Ali, so this is sparking concerns about the banking system. How's Congress reacting to all this?
Look, it depends on which party you're talking to, because for Democrats, the answer is clear here, especially after what we saw with SVB last week. Democrats, for the most part, are saying this is a sign that we need to do more regulating of the banking system, especially these mid-sized banks that saw some of the regulations that govern them rolled back during the Trump administration. On the Republican side, though, there's a little bit more of a wait-and-see vibe. Listen to the difference between Senator Warren and Senator John Thune, for example. Watch.
We need to learn from what has just happened with these banks and go forward by tightening the regulations. It's just that simple.
If there are ideas out there that people have, at some point we'd be willing to entertain those, but I think it'd be premature to start talking about solutions before we fully define the problem.
Now, look, Democrats still have the majority in the Senate. They are clearly going to push forward on some legislative front, but there's even some dissension among Democrats on what the best way forward is on this. I think the thing that we can definitely bank on, if I may pun for a moment at this early hour of the morning, is that we're going to be seeing some hearings on Capitol Hill. I know from talking to the head of the Senate Banking Committee, for example, Sherrod Brown, he's very interested in starting to do hearings, whether that's with regulators first or with banking CEOs. That's the thing they're trying to figure out in the short term.
So, Caleb, you said that stocks rebounded yesterday by the time the Dow was closing. Do you expect that to hold today?
Well, stocks are sort of mixed in the open here because we're still waiting for more headlines. We like our banks to be boring. It's been anything but boring in the banking sector lately because of these rising rates. There is a big interest rate decision coming from the European Central Bank later today. That could set the markets one way or the other, because if the ECB continues to raise rates, and then we have our own Fed meeting next week, and the Fed continues to raise rates, rising rates has been part of the problem here with these banks' balance sheets. So that's one pivotal thing to watch today.
So, Ali, today we're going to see the Treasury Secretary Yellen expected to testify before the Senate Finance Committee. What can we expect from that?
Yeah, Yellen is not going up there to testify about all the things that we've been talking about. She's going to testify about President Biden's budget. Nevertheless, nothing happens in a vacuum on Capitol Hill. And in our conversations with senators yesterday, many of them plan to ask her about this current financial situation, the things that we're currently seeing in the stock market, the volatility seemingly of this banking system right now, and potentially what regulations or not, as we just showed the partisan divide there, the administration might think could help as they they seek to shore up this system and just make sure that the banking system stays consistent at this point. But Yellen sure to face a whole range of questions from budget to banking today as she appears before these senators.
All right, Caleb Silver, Ali Vitale, thanks for kicking us off this hour.
The U.S. Department of Defense has released new footage, which it says shows the aerial encounter between a U.S. spy drone and a Russian warplane over the Black Sea. The Pentagon says the fighter jet dumped fuel over the drone and clipped it, forcing it to crash. Moscow denies there was a collision. It comes as NBC News is learning new details about the incident. According to 3 U.S. officials familiar with the intelligence, the highest levels of the Kremlin approved the alleged aggressive action. But speaking on MSNBC yesterday, a spokesperson for the State Department said the incident was most likely an unintentional act.
I think the best assessment right now is that it probably was unintentional. It probably was the result of profound incompetence on the part of one of these Russian pilots. But at the end of the day, Andrea, it's really immaterial. It doesn't really matter because what matters is what actually happened. A Russian aircraft caused us to down this U.S. unmanned aerial vehicle. That could have created a much larger incident.
NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee joins us now with more on this. So, Carol, tell us a little bit more about what we are learning and what these U.S. officials have told NBC News.
Well, Ellison, they're saying that this aggressive action over the Black Sea was authorized by the highest levels of the Russian government, including that fuel drop. And what the U.S. officials are telling my colleague Courtney Cubie and I is that that fuel drop seems to be intended to either disable the drone or block it from being able to conduct its surveillance, which is what it was doing. Now, one official tells us that, look, that they are not seeing indications that this went all the way up to Russian President Vladimir Putin. However, other officials that we talked to said wouldn't go that far and just said, look, this is something that was authorized at the highest levels. Now, you can see that video there that the U.S. government has now released shows that fuel drop and this clipping. Now, when it comes to the Russian aircraft clipping the drone, that is something that U.S. officials don't think was intentional, that it's likely that was something that was pilot error. But nonetheless, this is overall harassment of that drone in that space is something that U.S. officials believe was authorized by the highest levels of the Russian government.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and General Mark Milley held rare phone conversations with their Russian counterparts. Do we know exactly what was discussed in that call, anything that came out of it, and what the message is from the Kremlin?
Well, we know that this is rare, as you said, because they haven't spoken in months, either of them. We are hearing from the Russian Foreign Ministry about that call with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and it doesn't sound like they've really reached any sort of conclusion in terms of or agreement on where to go forward from here. The Russian Foreign Ministry is saying that these drones flying in this area near Crimea is provocative, and going on to say that the Russian Federation is not interested in such a development of events, meaning escalation in that region, but that it will continue to respond proportionally to all provocations. And so they see this drone flying in this area as a provocation. The U.S. does not, says these are international airspace, international waters, and they're going to continue to conduct themselves accordingly. But the U.S.'s view on this, and we've heard Secretary Austin say this explicitly, is it's better to be talking than not be talking.
This drone crashed in the Black Sea, which, of course, is closer to Russian territory than it is to U.S. territory. Do we have any sense at this point of who has recovered what is left of that drone?
We have a little bit of a sense of who's there, and that is the Russians. According to U.S. officials we talked to, the Russians were very quickly there with ships and aircraft. It's not clear, though, exactly what they're going to find. This is a drone that crashed into the sea, and it's in very deep waters. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, he addressed this yesterday in his press conference. Take a listen.
Probably about maybe 4,000 or 5,000 feet of water, something like that. So any recovery operation is very difficult at that depth by anyone. It probably broke up. There's probably not a lot to recover, frankly. As far as the loss of anything of sensitive intelligence, etc., as normal, we would take, and we did, take mitigating measures.
Now, one U.S. official tells us, Ellison, that while the Russians may be there, that it's not clear to them that they've actually recovered anything. And as you heard General Milley say there, that there's not a lot of expectation from the U.S. that they would actually find something sensitive.
Okay, all right, Carol Lee, thank you so much.
Now to the latest on the investigation into former President Trump involving hush money paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Her lawyer says that Daniels spoke with prosecutors yesterday about the $130,000 payment she says she received on Trump's behalf in the final days of the 2016 presidential campaign. This comes as the former president's ex-lawyer, Michael Cohen, gave a second day of testimony before a Manhattan grand jury that's looking into the case. Cohen set up that payment to Daniels. For the latest, we're joined by NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who joins us from West Palm Beach, Florida. Vaughn, good morning to you. So what do we know about Stormy Daniels meeting with prosecutors? And then what more can you tell us about Michael Cohen's second day of testimony before that New York grand jury?
Yeah, good morning, guys. This is significant here development, the fact that Stormy Daniels met with prosecutors, because in the case of a grand jury and the decision from a district attorney whether to bring charges against, in this case, Donald Trump or not, first, you have to present evidence and also witnesses who can testify to the grand jury, because ultimately it's up to that grand jury to decide whether to vote up or down on whether those charges can or cannot be filed. So for Stormy Daniels to meet here with prosecutors yesterday in New York suggests that the district attorney is looking to present her to the grand jury. As for Michael Cohen, he wrapped up his 5 hours of testimony after 2 days just yesterday. He is really the key witness in this. Of course, he's the former fixer and lawyer for Donald Trump, who transferred that $130,000 from Donald Trump to himself to Stormy Daniels. Of course, Michael Cohen has since flipped on the former president and says that he is looking to speak the truth and hold, if it means holding Donald Trump accountable, holding him accountable.
And Vaughn, we know former President Trump, has been active on Truth Social. How's he reacting to these court proceedings? How are his lawyers looking to defend him?
Right. I think the difference between Donald Trump's defense versus his counsel's defense are two very different things. Donald Trump late last night posting on his social media account, quote, "I did nothing wrong in the, quote, horseface case." Of course, the derogatory term he's used to describe Stormy Daniels. "I see she showed up in New York today trying to drum up some publicity for herself." Donald Trump denies ever having a sexual relationship with Stormy Daniels. And he makes the case, as his counsel does, that the $130,000 was what amounted to a private contract, that he was simply trying to silence what was a defamatory story against him ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Of course, that is where this ultimately is going to come down to, if he were to be indicted, the court of law to determine whether this potentially extended to an election campaign finance violation, what amounted to an in-kind campaign contribution to improperly try to influence the outcome of that presidential election against Hillary Clinton.
And Vaughn, quickly, I want to ask you about the Georgia case also hanging over Trump. Investigators looking into whether Trump illegally meddled in the 2020 election in that state. Where do things stand there?
Yeah, there could be an indictment out of Fulton County, Georgia at any hour as well. We know that there are at least 18 targets. Potentially Donald Trump is one of those as well, as part of a widespread investigation into efforts into Fulton County to overturn the 2020 election. And we actually just got confirmation last night from our own Blaine Alexander in Atlanta that the grand jury that was impaneled there to hear testimony and evidence heard a phone call from Donald Trump in December of 2020 to the then House Speaker, pressuring him to call a special session to have them overturn Donald Trump's loss there. And so this is the type of testimony that has been presented in Georgia, but now it's ultimately going to come down to the district attorney whether she chooses to try to press charges against Donald Trump and potentially others as well.
Decision we expect possibly any time now. All right, Vaughn, thank you so much.
A judge has heard arguments in a lawsuit that aims to ban an abortion medication. Mifepristone, the pill at the heart of the case, has been legally used in the United States for decades now, but some fear the outcome of this case could send a ripple effect across the country. NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns reports from Texas.
In the first public hearings in this high-stakes case, the judge in that courtroom behind me there heard arguments from both the plaintiffs and the defendants in a case that could have nationwide impact on abortion access.
Anticipation in Amarillo building for weeks as a case in this Texas courthouse could restrict access nationwide to the abortion pill, the most commonly used method for terminating pregnancies in the country. A conservative judge appointed by President Trump could soon decide whether to issue a preliminary injunction blocking access to Mifeprex, generically known as mifepristone. The FDA approved it as part of a 2-drug abortion regimen in 2000.
Both sides had 2 hours to present their arguments, the judge peppering attorneys with detailed questions, the judge delaying adding it to the public docket to avoid a, quote, circus-like atmosphere.
The note inspiring one group of demonstrators.
I remember before Roe v. Wade, and now I'm looking at it all over again.
I value life. I think it's extremely precious.
The plaintiffs are challenging the FDA's approval of the drug, arguing the agency didn't adequately evaluate its safety and endangered women further when they made the drug available via telemedicine during the pandemic. The FDA says the claims in the lawsuit are unsupported by any evidence and said in court today that a ruling in the plaintiffs' favor would amount to unprecedented action and would cause significant public harm. Since its approval in 2000, the FDA says more than 5 million women have taken mifepristone, with 28 deaths associated with the drug.
What happens here today will be felt by all Americans, no matter what your feelings are on abortion.
A ruling that could radiate nationwide.
Now, we don't know when the judge will issue a decision. It could be in the next couple of days. It could be in the next few weeks. One thing we do know, though, from both sides on this issue, this could have a significant impact in every state.
Dasha, thanks so much.
Another winter storm is on the move today. Joining us now, meteorologist Michelle Grossman with the latest.
Good morning, Michelle. What are you seeing?
Good morning, guys. We're seeing a large storm in the middle of the country. We're seeing a cold side, and then we're also seeing a warm side. So snow on the backside of this storm system, some severe weather later on this afternoon into this evening hours as we really get the daytime heating going. This was what it looks like on radar. You can see the blue. That's where the snow is falling. The green is the rain, and then sort of in between the pinks and purples, that is the freezing precipitation. So some sleet falling and also some freezing rain. That will be the theme throughout this Thursday. Here are the players on the field. We have 2 areas of low pressure. They're bringing that cold front through. It's bringing some cold air on the backside of this system. So snow and wind impacting the upper Midwest. Right now, the Central Plains, also portions of the Great Lakes. And then out ahead of this system, it's warmer. So we're seeing that severe risk later on this afternoon from the Southern Plains to the Mississippi Valley. And we're looking at the chance for some long track supercell tornadoes, also some very large hail, some gusty winds, and some flash flooding. By tomorrow, a bit of rain, snow for the Northeast. This is St. Patty's Day, and then a line of storms continues across the Southeast. So that severe weather threat shifts into the Gulf Coast, into the Southeast tomorrow, and then it moves off the coast as we head towards the weekend. This is what it looks like in terms of your severe threat today. 22 million people at risk for hail. It's going to be large at times. Winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. A strong tornado or 2 is possible, especially where you see that darker orange. So Dallas, Texarkana, portions of southern Oklahoma, you could see some strong storms. And this is where we're concerned about the hail. McAllister down to Sherman, Commerce, Denton, Dallas, Ennis, and also Granbury. We're looking at the chance for some large hail there. Then by Friday, this moves off to the east. So now we're talking the Gulf Coast states, New Orleans, Mobile, Panama City, Dothan. You could see some severe storms, and that would include winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Some hail also not quite as large as today, and a tornado or 2 is possible. Rainfall forecast, the heaviest rain falling throughout portions of Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, into Mississippi, where you see those darker colors, the yellows. And then we're looking at 7 million people looking at some winter weather today. Back to you guys.
Can't get enough of that winter weather up there.
It's like they know you're from Minnesota.
Exactly.
They just want to make sure you feel comfortable everywhere.
All right.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.